Good morning. How are we? Yeah? Grand. All right, we are picking up our text here in Genesis chapter 47. We're coming down the home stretch of the life of Jacob. And I use Logos Bible software. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's pretty extensive research stuff for the Bible. And there's a free version, there's a cheap version, there's a not so cheap version, there's a really not cheap version. And so when I began my studies at Heritage, I went for the not so cheap version that was debt worthy. And so got a bunch of resources that I use to study. And this just so happens, if you've seen this Bible here on the screen, these little indicators, now it's gone, now it's back. These little indicators right here, if you click on that, it'll show you a map of what you're talking about in the text. See if I can make that any bigger for you. So there we go. So you have, let's see, can you see the mouse? Yeah, so here we have basically where Jacob and his family were living, and then here you've got it kind of highlighted where the region of Goshen is. So in that region right there is where we have his family settling after they've come back to Egypt during the Great Famine. So just kind of give you a image of that. This is really helpful. For example, we're looking at Paul's missionary journeys in the book of Acts, because you don't really know what these places look like, and then all of a sudden you see it and like, oh, we went pretty far, right? So that's something I wanted to share with you real quick. Let's make this go away. There we go. All right, so we are in Genesis 47, picking up in verse 13. To kind of give you a small recap, you have, of course, Joseph revealing his identity to his brothers. They go back and get Dad, and then they bring Dad back to Egypt. He presents himself before his father thinking he's been dead this whole time. In fact, that's not true. And so it seems like Joseph has kind of forgiven the offenses that his brothers did against him, because he said, look, God put me in this position. Don't beat yourself up over what you did, because God used it for us to be able to be here to provide for you and for all the people that are there. So Joseph's in Egypt. He's taking care of all the people that need food during this great famine. And then we have Jacob presenting himself before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's like, hey, by the way, how old are you? He goes, I've had 130 years in this life, and it's been difficult, but I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having us. And then he let them settle in the location of Goshen. So, verse 12, and Joseph provided his father, his brother, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. Again, tax season was just upon us, so dependence is one of those words that you love to hear around the 15th, right? So, while they're in Egypt, we have a new narrative picking up here in verse 13. Now, there was no food in all the land, because the famine was very severe. So the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. So remember the dream that Pharaoh got originally when you have Joseph in the prison. And the prison guard said, hey, we got the guy who's got the ability to understand dreams, 7 good years, 7 bad years. So Joseph gathered up, verse 14, all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When all the money was spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone. So you got a problem with the economy here, right? Basically, you have a lot of people bringing in a lot of money from the territory. They're all spending it in Egypt on food, and now all the money is gone, but the food still remains. Verse 16, Joseph answered, give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. So we have a bartering system taking place now, right? So the currency is no longer valuable. They have all run out of that, but they have property that's worth something. So he puts a lien on all their property. Again, tax season's a great time. And he's giving them food that year in exchange for their property. When that year was ended, verse 18, they came to him the following year and said, "We will not hide from my Lord that our money is all spent. The herds of the livestock are my Lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my Lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate." And so the property's gone, the money is gone, so they're saying, just buy us when it comes to being servants or slaves, and we will work for you so we can live and not die. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for all the Egyptians sold their fields. Because the famine was severe on them, the land became Pharaoh's. So here you have the scariest thing in the mind of a libertarian: the government seizing control of all the property in the land, right? Okay, no one laughed at that. That was kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. Big government is now stepping up, right? As for the people, he made servants of them from one end of Egypt to the other. Only the land of the priest he did not buy, for the priest had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on the allowance the Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell the land. So who are the priests here in verse 22, do you reckon?
The gods of Egypt's priests.
Egyptian gods, right? Not the one true God, because that's a whole other thing that's been introduced to the land through Jacob and Joseph. Then Joseph said, verse 23, to the people, "Behold, I have this day bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field, and as for food for yourselves and your households, and as for food for your little ones." They said, "You saved our lives. May it please my Lord, we will be servants to Pharaoh." So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day. So to this day gives you a timestamp, right? So you have an author writing this. We would just assume, for sake of argument, it's going to be Moses is writing this, or someone writing for Moses. And you have saying that statute of 1/5 going to Pharaoh is a statute that is in preparation for the future as well. That Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priest alone did not become Pharaoh's. Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. Well, yeah, to say the least. I mean, if you know Exodus chapter 1, then yeah, verse 27 is definitely a true statement. How many people, how many souls came with the family of Jacob originally? You recall? 70, right? And they're going to be a bit more than that when it's time for the Exodus, right? You have a rough estimate of looking at the guys that are there, and then you have the rabble which are there. The rebels are kind of like half Egyptian, half Israelite, or from the seed of Jacob or Israel. And you've got 1.5, rough estimate, million people leaving in the Exodus. So, yeah, for sure. Okay, verse 28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. So we got 130 back at the introduction from the previous context. Now you got him there 17 years later, 147 years. And then, believe it or not, verse 29, when the time drew near that Israel, the Jacob, must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If now I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. carry me out of Egypt and bury me in the burying place, which is where you bury someone. He answered, I will do as you have said. He said, swear to me. He swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. Okay, a couple things in here. Remember, originally, you have the original patriarch, right? Abraham. And the promise was, hey, leave the place where you're from, place where you grew up, leave your father's house, and go to a land that I will show you. I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to your people and to all the world, essentially. But you're going to this place I'm going to show you, which we know as the land of Canaan, right? And so you've got Abraham, you've got Isaac, and you've got Israel or Jacob here, living in that land because of the seed promise that Abraham originally received in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, right? So he's saying, I don't want to have my bones buried in Egypt. I want to go back to that promised land. Now, that promised land thing is not quite what we think of as the promised land quite yet. That really kicks off in Exodus, right? When you have Moses being told, you got to get out of here. It's not good for you guys here. You need to have this way of escape to get to the promised land. And then that's the Exodus, right? A couple things. Put your hand under my thigh and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. That's a thing that we don't do, thankfully, anymore, culturally. That's not how you make a promise. You don't have to walk over someone and put your hand under their thigh, which is culturally what they would have done, I assume. But we don't do that. What's our version of that nowadays? Shaking hands. Much more appropriate. No questions asked. Just give me your hand, I'll shake it. I'm not armed, you're not armed, we make an agreement. That's the old school way, right? So that's...
I always wondered about that. Did they do it when they were doing it, they would do it when they were sitting down?
I would sure hope so. I mean, it looks awkward otherwise, right? Well, he's on his bed, right? So I assume he's not ambulatory. He's not moving around. He bows himself in verse 31 upon the head of his bed. Seems like the most he can do is sit up in bed now. And if I can just sit up in bed at 147 years old, he's doing pretty good, right? There is the question, which I don't have the answer for, why they lived so long back in the day. We have some theories. The science of it is not really science per se. It's just conjecture. So I'm not going to even really go into it too much further if you don't want me to. But they lived a long time back then. And then we see the age of death kind of getting back to what we would call normal. And of course, now going to 90 is pretty standard. Okay, any questions about that text right there? Let me lie with my fathers. Again, there's that, do you see a spiritual side in here or a physical side in here? Probably both. The physical side would be, back in the day, you would put the body in a tomb, and then the flesh would go away. You have the bones, and you have the bone boxes. So you go in there after a couple generations and put all the bones together in a smaller box. And then you would stack that box on your other boxes of your family members. So you're lying with your fathers in the sense of your bones are placed on top of their bones. That's the physical side of it. Spiritual side of it, of course, I don't think it's really in here too much, to be honest. But we do know, of course, the afterlife is a legitimate thing. The the Sadducees didn't think so. That's why they were Sadducees. The joke, you have to know. You have to say it. And so they didn't see any spiritual side in the afterlife at all. And then Jesus was like, no, you're wrong. So here's the real truth. There is an afterlife. Okay, that's glossing over a lot. But any questions about that? All right. So you have Israel, a.k.a. Jacob. He's about to die. And he's going to kind of do what his dad did, minus the whole Esau being red and hairy and making some really good stew. He's going to give blessings, and it seems like also prophetic utterances towards his children and the children that they have. So they will be known as tribes later when they all kind of get so big they're not just family anymore. But you got this blessing of different sons and different kind of prophecies about what their lineage would hold, which is interesting. A couple in here are very significant. Some are just kind of general, so we'll get through it into the text. Okay, last chance. Any questions, comments, thoughts? No thoughts? It's a good Sunday morning Bible class. All right. Chapter 48, verse 1. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So we have Joseph being told this, right? Not Jacob. So you have Joseph and his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. It was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. So that kind of confirms what we thought before. He's not able to get out of bed quite yet. Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you. I will make of you a company of peoples and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession.'" A couple things. So when he was leaving the land of Canaan to go to Egypt originally, remember this seed line promise was reiterated during that time, and now he's kind of remembering that promise, right? Okay. Offspring after you, at the end of verse 4, for an everlasting possession. I think it's important to note here, just for the sake of argument, that when you see this kind of promise, are there contingencies in place or not? Are there conditions for this promise or not?
When he originally gave it, yes, there was.
Okay. So the problem we have sometimes with interpreting these promises to the patriarchs is skipping over the conditions that were in place. We're going to get details upon details, a plethora of conditions, especially in Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus. They say, hey, listen, this place will be your inheritance. It will be your land of possession, contingent that you keep all the laws, you keep all the rules, you kill all the people that are there, you don't let their gods influence you. And guess what happened? We just went through the minor prophets. You know what happened, right? So the contingency of the everlasting possession is important to note here. The reason why I mention that is because sometimes you have folks say, well, it's still Israel's land. Now, I'm not going to get into that argument with you this morning. I'm just going to say that when you're looking at the land now versus the land back then, there were different factors involved. Okay? All right. Now, verse 5. "And your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are." So what's happening here?
I'll give them equal parts of inheritance.
Absolutely. So he's saying, hey, I'm counting your children in the inheritance. You're not disinherited. I am essentially, for the sake of the contract here, I'm adopting these as my sons. Okay. "And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance." So you have more sons to Joseph, but they are put under the oversight, if you will, of the two Ephraim and Manasseh. "As for me, when I came from Paddan Aram, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way." Didn't really hear about that, did we? Previously, but now we know. "When there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, I buried her on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem." Does that sound familiar? Hopefully it should. Right? It's not Christmas season, but that should be somewhat familiar. "When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, 'Who are these?' Joseph said to his father, 'These are my sons whom God has given me here.' He said, 'Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them.'" Now again, the irony here is not lost, that you have a guy who stole the blessing from his older brother, Esau, now blessing the next generation. Okay. Jacob said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also." Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God of who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, and in them let the name be carried on in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." So we don't have this detail per se when Jacob stole the blessing from Esau. But now we kind of see a bit more of what it would have looked like just physically for an older patriarch to bless the next generation, right? So this ritual that we see here, we don't really do this anymore, do we?
Al Papa does sometimes.
Okay, well, Al Kunkel does it, okay?
He does bless.
He prays a blessing over his family members.
It's not a bad thing at all,
Specific ones.
right? Just his favorites. Just his favorite. No.
Favorite.
Yeah. So we have this culture using this opportunity to glorify God and to pass on the lessons of what God wanted and what his promises were into the next generation. So a very interesting thing to kind of see here, because we don't have a whole lot of this written about in Scripture besides these few little moments. You got a glimpse of it in Job because he was a patriarch, him offering sacrifices for his children that were grown already. But this is very, very specific. Okay. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. He took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "No, this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." His father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know." Now, I love that little line. Like, I know what I'm doing. Come on, man. He shall become a people, and he shall also be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. So, how do you know that?
He was given 2 tribes for Ephraim and for Manasseh.
Right.
He's double blessed.
Double blessed. There's a little bit going on here. How did Jacob, though, know, Jacob or Israel, know about the future of these 2 boys?
He had a direct line to God.
Well, yeah, God helped. Right? That's the answer. We have to assume here, all right, so he knows something that he can't otherwise know. And if you keep on reading in the books, what he says comes true. So who gave him the answer? Well, the answer obviously should be, well, God told him what's going on. So that's important to kind of note here, because as we go on, there's more predictive prophecy in these blessings than just, hey, hope you guys be good, listen to your daddy, that kind of stuff. It goes on to like, no, from your seed line, someone important is going to be born later, but you're going to be a terrible father and a terrible patriarch. So just keep going, right? So we have all of that happening here. So it's important to kind of note that as we continue on. Verse 20, so he blessed them that day, saying, "By you, Israel, shall pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh." So he kind of says, there's going to be a saying in the future that you're being blessed like Ephraim and like Manasseh. So that's good. Thus he puts Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel, Jacob, said to Joseph, "Behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow." So he's kind of giving out his inheritance, right? Before he passes away. There's a mountain slope. It's got your name written all over it. I won it in combat. It's now yours. Here we go. Verse 1 of 49. How many chapters are in Genesis? 50. So we're on the home stretch, right? Then Jacob called his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in the days to come. So if you weren't picking up the cues already, I've got some information to share before I kick the bucket here. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. That's good. Unstable as water, not good. You shall not have preeminence, but because you went up to your father's bed, then you have defiled it. He went up to my couch. Anyone unclear about what that means? He screwed up big time. He was proud of him, and unfortunately, he did not live up to that standard of who he should have been. Unstable as water is not a good thing, right? Okay. Verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, in their willingness they hamstrung oxen. We skipped over the part where they did that. For obvious reasons, it was a derailment from the actual narrative that we were trying to read through. If you need more details, I'm sure you can find it, right? So they were upset, and they used their violence to have vengeance, kinda, but it's not theirs to take. Okay, verse 7. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So he's now referring to the land itself here by his own name. So the nation of Israel, it's so common for us to forget the origin of that is Jacob. So the land of Jacob, the land of Israel. Just keep that in the back of your mind when you keep reading, that's how it's used here in the text. Okay. Here's the one, verse 8. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. That's good. You're going to be a leader, be victorious. Verse 9, Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? So he's going to be victorious and be engaged in combat for a long time. Verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Pause right there. So what is a scepter? Okay, symbol of a ruling power. This has the parallelism in the Hebrew language. I'm sure y'all remember me talking about that forever, right, in the Minor Prophets. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, the ruler's staff from between his feet. And so you have the same thing said two different ways for emphasis to kind of explain what's taking place here. Scepter, ruler, staff, not depart from Judah, from between his feet, from his generations, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So I ask the question, there's going to be a king born in the tribe of Judah, it would seem like, from the prophecy of Jacob, right? So which of the kings of Israel came from the tribe of Judah? David? There's going to be a great king coming from Judah. The first king was from Benjamin, right? Saul. King Saul was. Was David's father part of Judah? He was. He was, right? But it seems like there's maybe a little bit more here, right? You see that yet? So are we talking about David here in verses 10 and 11? Solomon? Well, what a mixed bag he was, right? Had all the wisdom in the world and didn't help him a tiny bit. All right, verse 11. Binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine. His teeth are whiter than milk. That's the king we're talking about? Okay. So we have the benefit of hindsight, right? We can say, well, this doesn't seem like David riding a donkey, riding a foal here. We don't see him wearing a garment full of blood and having white. So white teeth back in the day indicated what, by the way? There's a prophecy in the prophets about, well, in the future, you're going to have cleanness of teeth. That's great, right? Like Colgate, there you are. Crest Smile. If you have cleanness of teeth, what does that indicate biblically? Not royalty.
You're living a healthy life.
No, not even that. It's way worse.
Tell us now.
Okay, if you have cleanness of teeth, it means you don't have any food to eat. It means you're starving to death.
Oh, my goodness.
Really? You didn't know that? Okay. Hey, the more you know, right? So he has teeth that are whiter than milk. He's starving. He's hungry. There's no food. Yeah. So we've got this indication there's going to be some kind of king here from Judah that's going to be significant, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, from verse 10, part B, right? So we're talking about, it kind of fits David a little bit, but not really. Of course, we know we're talking about the scepter of God's kingdom is coming through the tribe of Judah, from whom is born Jesus, the Messiah. Okay, so even back here in Genesis 49, you had this prophecy about who Jesus would be. We talked about a while ago how when you read these narratives, read these stories, all of them in some way kind of give you a shadow of who Jesus is, right? Even in Genesis. You have the Garden of Eden. You've got this moment right here. You have Abraham offering his son Isaac, or about to offer his son Isaac, his only begotten son, as is called there in the text, right? And that's not the right son to be offered, is the point of that narrative, by the way. And so here you have this prophecy talking about Jesus coming through Judah. Okay, questions, comments?
I think it works well. I hadn't heard about that teeth whiter than milk, but it works well because later on Jesus said, look, if you follow me, you're not going to have anywhere to sleep. Go home, you're going to be homeless, basically.
Yeah, I'm thinking, personally, I could be wrong, but he's washed his garments in wine and his vesture in the blood of grapes. I'm thinking about the scourging and the suffering of the cross. His eyes are darker than wine. I mean, he's literally sweating drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's hung on the cross. His teeth are whiter than milk. He was thirsty. What did they give him? Vinegar, right? So bad wine is the idea. Even had some hyssop in it, which would have been somewhat helpful medically in the sense that it would have dulled his senses enough to be able to take more pain before he died. So just not a good situation. Okay, verse 13. Zebulun, to change gears, shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. So he's even saying here where your land allotments are in this moment. Being near the sea is good, because water usually is good when you're talking about where you're going to locate, but also for travel, for trade, that's going to be significant. Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant of forced labor. So remember that he was the one who decided, you know what, we don't really have to cross that Jordan River. We got land over here. Let's just chill out. We'll be okay. And they become slaves. Verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so his rider falls backwards. Sorry, Dan. You're not the man. All right. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Raider shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears fruitful fawns. Joseph is a Yay, Joseph, is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely, yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, for there is a shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with the blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. By the way, verse 25, blessings of the heaven above. We talked about heaven quite recently. What's this in reference to? 2 and 3? Well, I think it's just one. Remember, we have 4 different types of heaven. You have the one up there that's blue because there has to be water up there. What else would make it blue? And it's stretched out like a dome that's covering the earth here that's obviously flat. And we have this dome above us, and then there are things stuck in the dome that's up there where the water is. There are like lights coming through. Those are the stars. And you have these 2 big ones, the sun that goes across this shield, and then you have this moon that goes across as well. So that's the heavens above, literally the heaven that shields us from the water up there. Remember all that conversation? Definitely. Okay, moving on. The blessing of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be upon the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who is set apart from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, at the evening dividing the spoil. Sorry, Benji, you didn't quite live up to your daddy's good name. I would imagine we're talking primarily, historically, about Benjamin being here, from whom came the first king. Okay, questions, comments?
Are these the words of a dying old man,
Yes, it is.
or are they inspired?
Well, yeah, it would have to be inspired, right? Because he knows things here that he would have no way of knowing. If they're not inspired, then he's a really good guesser. He is, yeah. I mean, the whole point of it, right? So you have the land blessing, you have the seed line blessing of you'll be a great nation to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. And then from you shall be the blessing of the whole earth, all the nations of the earth. There's a bit more, and they never really dive into that last bit of blessing all the nations of the earth until we kind of get later when they're like, there's someone coming, and we don't know who he is. Like Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, like we see this guy in the future. We don't know who he is. Then the Hebrews writer was like, yeah, you guys are like desiring to know who those things were. It's Jesus. That's the whole point. Okay. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each one with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. So again, there's 2 ways to read that. In a literal sense of gathered to my people, meaning my bones in the box are placed on their bones in the box. Or you take the more spiritual vision of it saying, gathered to my people, like they're still somewhere with God, I'm going to go to them. So there's that. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that's in the field of Machpelah, to the east of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. Who's the first person buried there? Do you recall? Sarah. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they are buried Isaac and Rebekah, his wife, and there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that's in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. So next week, Lord willing, we will close out chapter 50 of Genesis, and we'll get to the thing about, did he really forgive his brothers, or was he just waiting for dad to be gone before he exacted his revenge? If you already know, keep it to yourself. No spoilers, right? And we'll close this out and then move on to our next discussion after this class is done. Thanks so much for your time and your attention. We'll be dismissed now for about 20 minutes before worship begins.